Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're logging in from. And this is actually a testament to the success of this network Park Launch that Ali and his colleagues have built. It used to be there were a few people during the first few of these webinars, and we would know where they're logging in from, and now they're sometimes hundreds of people. So a very warm welcome to everybody, and thanks for joining us, despite the Taraweeh prayers in Pakistan and the PSL final is about to start in about an hour or so. We'll try to wrap it up before that. I'm joined by Yana Yasevich from Alter Global. She's the head of platform there, and we'll have a discussion about Alter's investments in Pakistan, their broader investment thesis, um, and a few questions that I thought would be helpful for both investors and entrepreneurs, as well as a lot of the ecosystem players that are part of this Park Launch platform. I'll let Yana introduce herself and Alter, and maybe talk a bit about the investment thesis of Alter, and then we'll dig into the questions. And we'll leave about 20 minutes or so towards the end for Q&A from the audience. So Yana, what does head of platform at Alter do?
Well, it's a great question and a spot to begin because the title really does mean something different at every firm. And it's certainly no different at Alter in that capacity. So first of all, thank you all for having me. It's wonderful to speak with more of this community every time that I've had the privilege and the pleasure to interact with members from the Pak Lunch community. It's just an incredible gathering of folks passionate about continuing to develop Pakistan's tech ecosystem. So I'm grateful to be here with all of you. And as KZ shared, I am head of platform at a firm called Alter Global. We are an early stage firm that invests exclusively in emerging markets. So we invest across South and Southeast Asia, where we invest in Pakistan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Bangladesh, India, and we're starting to look at Vietnam. We invest quite a bit in the Middle East and Africa, and more specifically in those regions, we are focusing our investments across Nigeria, Egypt, and the UAE for now. And then finally, the other region that we invest quite heavily in is Latin America. And more specifically within Latin America, we invest in Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. And we are early stage investors, so we invest primarily pre-seed through Series A. Sometimes we will follow on a bit later as well, but pre-seed through Series A is really our sweet spot. And as a firm in general, our check sizes, they tend to begin around 250,000 and they go up sometimes to 1 to 2 million. And our ideal entry check is about that 500,000 range. And then, yes, we prefer to be able to follow on and double down on our conviction in subsequent rounds. And from a sector perspective in general, we're very, very interested in the transformation of industries that have historically been operated without technology. And so all of our investments have a tech foundation of some kind within them, and they fall typically into a couple of different buckets. Historically, those would be fintech, they would be B2B commerce and enablement solutions, they would include logistics, and specifically logistics digitization plays, because particularly in emerging markets, that's an infrastructure that is still very much being built out. We also invest a bit in education, insurance, and healthcare. And all of that said, we're also actively challenging ourselves right now to be more open to broadening that horizon of investment sectors and be as responsive as we can be, frankly, to the markets that we invest in and the kinds of opportunities we see coming out of them. So those sectors that I mentioned have definitely been our historical status quo in terms of what we invest in, but it's just one part of, I think, long-term where we'll be focused. And to share a little bit about my own background for a moment, I began my career in product management in New York, And I was working at the time for a Fortune 200 company developing software for them and specifically managing teams of engineers to build and deploy all of various pieces, excuse me, of e-commerce solutions that Estée Lauder and all of its portfolio companies would utilize. And I was really grateful for the technical skill set that it gave me and the experience of working at such a large company that I was able to get. But ultimately, I personally knew that staying in such a large organization wasn't what was particularly driving for me. And so I transitioned back to the Bay Area where I'm originally from and pivoted to starting my own company. I wanted to start something in part because I felt that while obviously we hear quite a few quote unquote success and failure stories, we can talk a little bit why, but I don't believe in that language per se of failure. But while you hear those examples, there are very few actual practical learnings that you can get from the outside in on what does day one and day two and day three actually look like of starting a company? How do you know how to incorporate or what kind of incorporation structure to choose? And how do you spend your first marketing dollars? And when do you? And what are the metrics that you should be looking towards? And all of these things were really driving me to want to learn, frankly, that experience. And the truth is I was also at a moment in my own life and career where I had the capacity to make that choice, to make that trade-off, which I'm deeply grateful for. And so I started a company with a friend of mine, and we ran the company together for a period of time. And in the background, always in my own mind, as someone who was fundraising for our business and obviously working quite intently with other investors and so forth, was okay, as a female founder, I actually statistically have slightly of a lower percentage chance of raising funding. Uh, I happen to also be an immigrant. My parents and I immigrated to the States when I was a young child, but I, in a lot of ways, had every opportunity at my disposal. I went to a good school. I am from Silicon Valley, and fundraising already was more challenging. And so it really spurred this question for me that I couldn't get out of my mind, which was, if I, with all of the incredible gifts and privileges that I've been able to have, am struggling with fundraising, who is backing founders that actually represent an underrepresented investment group? Who is backing immigrant founders? Who is backing founders with different ethnicities and educational backgrounds? How can we level the playing field in that capacity? Because talent is global, talent is everywhere, and really what's missing is equitable access to resources. And so this question that I kept ruminating on and trying to understand more drew me ultimately to finding Alter and falling in love, frankly, with the mission and the vision of what the firm wanted to do and how it wanted to evolve over time. And I've been with Alter now for about 3 years, and am tremendously grateful every day that I get to have this be my work and the way in which I engage with the global community. So I'll wrap it up in the next minute just by sharing that for me, my day-to-day splits into a couple of different categories. Most of my time I spend working with our founders, helping them scale their businesses. And that looks very, very different on a practical level for every company, based on their stage, based on their current needs. So sometimes it's as in the weeds with them as building out a new revenue line or trying to understand the reasons behind customer churn numbers. And sometimes it's as high level and interpersonal as just being a listening ear for them and making them feel very deeply and sincerely that they are not alone on what is a lonely and difficult journey. So that is the majority of my own personal scope. And then I spend quite a bit of time also just frankly trying to bring more global investors and limited partners into the fold of investing in emerging markets. So deepening their understanding of what opportunity these markets present, deepening their interest in investing in them, starting to present them with opportunities. And so that's a bit of my time as well. But I'll pause here because
Right.
I know I've been sharing for a while.
No, that was very good. Thank you for that rich introduction. Yana, I know that you've invested in at least three startups in Pakistan: Bazaar, which is a B2B company; Maqsad, an edtech; and I believe an ag tech called Tazah. Now, I think they call themselves Zambil now.
Zambil.
Walk us through, for those of us who are in Pakistan, live and breathe, the Pakistani entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have this, we know how rich it is, and what the potential of this ecosystem is. For somebody outside of Pakistan, can you walk us through the process of discovering Pakistan? Was that an opportunistic investment? Your very first investment in Pakistan, was that opportunistic? Would you have some sort of a thesis where there's a list of countries and priorities, and then whenever a country becomes current, you go out and seek investment opportunities there? Walk us through that process of evaluating the country risks, the very first investment here. Do you go work through partners? Do you lead? Do you follow? And how does your presence grow in a country like Pakistan?
Of course. So there's a little bit of precursor history here, which is that Alter actually started as a nonprofit in 2015 and operated that way for 5 years before transitioning to a for-profit firm in 2020. And the reason behind that was that when our founding partner, Jesse Sullivan, went to limited partners in Silicon Valley in 2015 and shared with them this mission and vision that we wanted to execute on of investing early stage in emerging markets, limited partners' reaction at the time was one of a lot of skepticism and hesitation, because in 2015, as we can all think back on now, the willingness to invest in markets like Pakistan or Mexico or Indonesia was much lower than it is today because the opportunity felt more foreign and more unclear in general. And so those first 5 years that we operated as a nonprofit were really focused on developing a deep thesis of, okay, if you think about emerging markets as a whole, how do you segment down into markets that are quote unquote ready for investment at a particular moment in time? What are the factors that contribute to that? And it was that led us to making our first investments in 2020 and feeling very strongly like Pakistan should be a part of that mix. So some of the elements that we looked at to help make that decision for us included things like, first of all, population size. And in general, I mean, with a population of close to 243 million, Pakistan represents just baseline an incredible opportunity. The increasing digitization rates, which we started to see then and have only continued since. In general, the regulatory environment and baseline, its willingness to support entrepreneurs or its willingness to be flexible for entrepreneurs to come in and start new businesses. When we started to see the presence, and certainly your fund is a part of that, the presence of other local funds that wanted to invest in the ecosystem, and more people being interested in potentially building something domestically rather than only exploring opportunities outside of the country. All of those factors contributed to us making the decision to make our first investment with Bazaar in Pakistan in June of 2020. And the rest is history. I mean, our last investment, which was our second into Zambil, formerly known as Tazah, that happened in January of 2022. So I think where we are right now, frankly, is really trying to figure out what that next investment in Pakistan is going to be, and actively looking for it. And with respect to our process of how it actually comes to be that we get introduced to a company and they run through our flow, it's a variety of factors. The first is us going and constantly trying to look and understand the market better. And as part of that, also reaching out to entrepreneurs, or maybe not even active entrepreneurs, but people thinking about building something in a given space and discussing it with them. The second bucket would be really working closely with local funds in each region. So I'm grateful that you and I are now connected, KZ, but beyond that also it's working closely with Atif, with everybody at Eye to Eye, with the folks at Samayakar and et cetera. Like the network is really blossoming, I think, and open to collaborating and sharing with one another. And I'm deeply grateful for that, because I think it's really fundamental to us being able to do our jobs well in a given market. And another is frankly through our own founders, who have just an amazing ear to the ground and can also be consistently educating us on what's going on and sharing unique resources and also opportunities that we might need to take a look at. So that's a bit of how our investment in Pakistan came to be. I believe you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm just recovering from flu, so I'm conscious of that and try to mute myself. Yana, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I was wondering if you could walk us through the archetype of a good startup that you would love to invest in a country like Pakistan, what stage it is at, what kind of founders it has, what kind of traction it has. You've already mentioned some of the sectors that you look at, but perhaps take a slightly deeper dive and share with us the kind of startup that you would seriously consider investing in, all other things being equal.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I'll start by saying that I've said this publicly in a handful of discussions before, I think Pakistani founders are really one of the most resilient and most prepared early stage founders that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And I think that the macro actually of Pakistan and investing in Pakistan is what I believe has contributed to that reality. And what I mean by that is, it's no question for any of us on this call that while there has been an amazing amount of investment that has gone into Pakistan in the last 5 years, that number is still very low, relatively speaking. And there's a huge necessity, frankly, for greater pools of capital into the ecosystem in order for it to thrive as much as it can. And so I think baseline what that has meant for entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs, there's a need for them to be incredibly prepared and incredibly determined about what it is that they're building if they're going to pursue that opportunity at all, because the difficulty of attracting capital, building a team, and attracting future financing is particularly difficult. And so I find that has translated in general to the founders that do come up and do choose to build something within the ecosystem are typically already very well prepared when it comes to thinking very intently about their unit economics, already showing up to the table, even at the pre-seed level, with some early signals of revenue, some early signals of how the market is responding to the product. And that, frankly, is something to be really proud of. I think that's a very strong indicator of operational readiness that we're always very drawn to when we see. In general, though, otherwise, from a founder standpoint, we try not to be prescriptive about what kind of background someone comes from or the experiences that they've had prior to becoming a founder, because I think that potentially artificially and incorrectly limits our own pool of people that we might be looking for. So we want to be as open as possible with that. And I think probably the only area that it becomes relevant in is, as a founder, are you building in a space that you know? Or are you trying to build something in an area that is completely unfamiliar to you? For example, if you've worked as a doctor or a pharmacist in the past and you choose to build something in the automotive space, it will be more difficult to make that case for yourself about why you uniquely are the best position to tackle that challenge. But if that same person chooses to build something in the healthcare realm, I think that there's a lot worth exploring there. For example, one thing that is unique to Alter that we particularly care about when we look for the founders that we are going to back is we are deeply, deeply committed to backing founders that are committed to building out the ecosystem that they are a part of. And what I mean by that is if we invest in a founder in Pakistan, it's critically important to us that that founder be in it for the long haul in terms of developing Pakistan's tech ecosystem. So we want someone that upon their own exit, upon their future success, is going to reinvest back into new early stage opportunities that exist in Pakistan. That is going to continue investing into supporting founders in various capacities, also with their operational knowledge, with their, at that point, investor experience, et cetera, but be continuing the growth of the ecosystem. And that's something that we feel very, very strongly about. So it's probably the singular thing about Alter that we are uniquely fixed on when it comes to our founder profiles, and otherwise really want to continue maintaining as open of a framework there as possible.
Great. I think that's a great bar and great litmus test to apply over how committed these founders are, not just to their own venture, but also the country and the market in which they're operating at. It's fantastic. Yana, one of the concerns or questions that early stage investors often find themselves pondering over when they're investing in a market like Pakistan is where the follow-on capital is going to come from, right? And we're not talking $2, $3, $4, $5 million rounds. Some of these startups that you've invested in, that we've invested in, very soon, after an early sort of traction and blitz, and spending the capital that they've raised, they're going to need 15, 20, 30, $40 million rounds. And we have seen startups that have that have reached that stage with very good founders, great unit economics, struggle to find capital for that large check that they needed in the country. What's your thesis when you invested in these companies? What was your thesis? You said you doubled down on the startups you invested in, but would you be able to, for example, take on a $20 million round all by yourself, or are you cultivating a network of investors, and do you actively go out and sort of evangelize the markets and startups that you've invested in so that there's visibility to that future pool of capital when these startups mature to a stage where they could use that capital? Do you have that? Is that a concerning point for you, or are you very comfortable? And where does that comfort come from? And if not, then how are you helping your startups find that capital when they get to that stage?
Yeah, critically important questions, I think. And it's a constantly evolving conversation too. I don't think it's actually ever fixed. Where we stand today, and I'll start by answering the question about Alter specifically, is that no, we personally would not, neither from a fund size nor from a portfolio strategy perspective, be able to, for example, own a 10, 15, 20, $30 million round entirely on our own. And so we would be looking for external investors to provide that for our portfolio companies that would be raising at that scale. I also completely agree with you that the funding gap is currently very high for companies at that stage to receive capital of that scale. I think it would be facetious not to acknowledge that. It's the truth. What we are trying to actively do to counter that, rather not even to counter, but to work with it and to begin changing that, is I personally spend a lot of my time speaking with growth stage funds like DST, Bond Capital, Dragoneer, Hummingbird, Tiger, Costa Noa's earlier, but Quona and others that hypothetically could be willing to put in a larger ticket at a future stage. And I'm consistently in conversation with them to understand what are their perspectives as a firm on investing in Pakistan or the surrounding countries. What are their hesitations? What are their excitement points? And wanting to show really that opportunity as much as possible to them. So those are conversations that I have with funds on a weekly level about different parts of the world that we invest in. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think that conversation ever finishes. I think it's something that we're always coming back to and trying to get more of the investment community around and excited about. And I see that as my job for the next decade in this space.
Okay. And what do you, what's the severity of that concern compared to other emerging markets that you invest in? Is Pakistan very unique because of, the macros right now and the political instability and all? Or do you find a lot of the emerging markets have the same problems, so we're not really unique in that respect?
I would say more of the latter than the former. I don't
Okay.
see any of Pakistan's macro level challenges, for example, with the current interest rates or the currency devaluation or what's going on politically. I don't see that as actually uniquely impacting investor sentiment about Pakistan and investing within it as an ecosystem. I think certainly we see that in other parts of the world. I mean, Nigeria and Egypt are just two good examples of countries that have experienced pretty meaningful devaluation of their own in the last year. So I don't think that Pakistan is uniquely positioned in that way. I do think that today, Latin America feels a little bit more understandable and more stable to Western investors in particular. But I think that is just a matter of time and further education about global opportunities that changes that perspective. So between the world at large, do I think that Pakistan is in like a particularly challenging position relative to other, for example, parts of South or Southeast Asia or Middle East Africa? No. Relative to, for example, Latin America, yes, it's in a more capital constrained position at the moment, but keeping it in mind as at the moment is important because we all know over the last 5 years and the way that capital allocation has fluctuated in different directions that it can change and it will change as time goes on. And that's why I think continuing to be very, very, very proactive and vocal, both ourselves and frankly, everybody else that is investing as an early stage investor in Pakistan, going and having conversations with all of those growth funds to gauge their current sentiment on the market and participate in educating them on the opportunity that exists is critically important.
Great. And building on that, Yana, I know almost every investor builds an exit thesis before they put in the first check into any company. What has been your exit thesis from these investments that you've written checks for in Pakistan? Do you expect them to IPO locally? Do you expect them to IPO internationally? Trade sales to strategics? What's the exit thesis there?
In truth, it's developing. So to say that we have a fixed thesis that we feel 100% confident on wouldn't be entirely truthful. I think it's developing. And so we are also in this with you on the next 10 years to see how that exit landscape continues evolving. I think that the opportunities that you mentioned feel like the right ones. I think probably our own internal mindset is that an exit through a strategic acquisition of some sort is the most likely route for a lot of our companies. And that could be by an MNC that's present in the country, or it could be by even, for example, a private equity firm that wants to begin tapping into what's going on in the market, as well as by just a larger maybe tech company of its own. On the IPO side, look, certainly the hope is that we can get Pakistani companies to be trading on some of the biggest global markets. But in addition to that, I do think across emerging markets as a whole, we are looking more and more at what's going on domestic stock exchanges as well, and think that there is a good amount of opportunity there that's just often overlooked. So
Yeah.
I would say that would be the case for us globally as well as in Pakistan.
Well, interestingly, PSX right now, I might be mistaken, but I know for a fact that some of the tech companies, they are commanding the highest price to earning multiples in Pakistan. So there is certainly a lot of demand for tech companies, and I think people are realize that the growth trajectory of a tech startup, tech business is is a lot more attractive compared to a typical manufacturing business. So some of these tech companies, even the services space, are trading at 15 to 20x multiple, compared to 5 to 8x that most of the investment comes in at. So that's certainly a very promising avenue, and I hope that develops going forward. Yana, is there ever a lot of investors, when we talk to them about follow-on investments into our startups, one of the concerns they highlight, although they don't have a lot of data to back that up, is whether they'll be able to get the money out of the country once they do exit successfully. Is that a concern for you? Do you ever think about that? Or are you
Really, the answer
actively...
is an easy no. In all of our investments that we've made across the globe, that hasn't been a particular concern when it comes to exits of our own companies. Part of it is likely, as I'm speaking about this with you live, part of it is likely because most of our companies are incorporated in other countries and they're doing that intentionally because of the flexibility of capital coming in and out of the countries that they're invested in, that they're domiciled in. So oftentimes, in addition to having a few companies domiciled in the US, a handful of them are incorporated at least in Singapore or in BVI or in Cayman Islands, UK. A handful are in Mexico that are in Latin America. So I think that's partially how some of those decisions are made on their behalf, but we've had one exit to date and we did not face that issue. So it's not
From
something
Pakistan?
that's not in Pakistan, but in another Southeast Asian market. And it's not something, frankly, that is top of mind as a concern for us at the moment.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. Did you face any regulatory challenges investing in Pakistan, Yana?
No,
Or
not to date.
anything that was not as smooth as, did they roll out the red carpet for you, or
No, truly.
No concern?
Investing in Pakistan to date has been no different than investing in any other company in any other part of the world.
That's fantastic. That's good to know. Wonderful. Last question from my side, Yana, and then we are nearing the 40-minute mark where Ali had commanded that we let the audience take over and ask the questions. So let's say I am an entrepreneur in Pakistan. I'm thinking of starting a company. I've just started a company. I'm very passionate about the business. I know the market. I know the tech. I've got a great team, but I'm not very well connected. How do they reach out? How do they connect with you? How do they make themselves visible to you?
Yeah. Well, the best person on our team to reach out to would be my partner in crime, Yash Kanoi. Yash is based in Kolkata in India, but has spent a lot of time researching the Pakistani market and getting to know other funds in the space, other founders, and it was him actually that helped us make a lot of our primary investments into Pakistan. So connecting with Yash would be the best bet. And I will share his email in the WhatsApp chat right now. Excuse me, not in the WhatsApp chat, in the Zoom chat right now.
Okay.
And I'm very happy for anybody to be able to share it as well with any founders in your networks or anything similar. So if you are building something and you are at that early stage moment, because we are truly pre-seed through Series A investors, please do reach out to Yash or feel free to ping myself. I personally am spending a lot more of my own time right now on fundraising for Alter's current and future funds. And so I am not as close to new deal flow, but Yash is a perfect point of contact to reach out to.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Yana. Ali, I'm not sure. Do you want me to go through the questions in the chat window, or do you do that? I'm going to go ahead and do it. So just stop me if I'm treading into your territory here. Okay, great. That was permission. All right. It doesn't say who the questions are for. It looks like everybody is sending Ali the question and he's posting it here. The first question, Yana, is do you have any local partners or preferred local VCs that you rely on for market intelligence or decision making? Can you walk through your investment process? I think you've touched upon this a bit, but do you prefer that they're local investors in the deal with you, or are you bold enough to just venture on your own in a new market?
Historically, we would always want to have a local partner present with us. And that really stems from the fact that while I'm the only team member based in San Francisco, in general, our team is based in the markets that we invest in. So we have a team member in Egypt that focuses on the Middle East and Africa. We have 2 team members in India that focus on South and Southeast Asia, respectively. We have a team member in Latin America that focuses on Brazil, that are all from the markets that we invest in. Typically, we would still, in addition to that, want to have a local partner just as a litmus test of making sure that we're aware of all of the potential nuances of the business. But as time goes on, we are also starting to become more bold and bullish ourselves about the markets that we've invested in to date. And so we would be open to potentially investing without the presence of a local partner. Though naturally, as a fund, all founders should know, we would want to know why potentially any other local fund wasn't interested. What was their rationale? What was holding them back potentially? Mm-hmm. In terms of preference on the partners themselves, no preference. We try to be as closely connected to every single fund in the region as possible. So be it Zain or RTP or Sharuk or any of the others that we've spoken about to date, it's a priority for us to have a strong relationship with them. And we're always just keen to learn about also what they're noticing that potentially we might not be seeing or seeing as clearly.
Okay. Next one is what sectors are more interesting? I think you've already talked about that. What do you look for in startup founders? Any specific traits?
Well, just to touch on the sector piece for just one second, so like I said, there's a couple that we focus on to date: fintech, logistics, B2B commerce and enablement, insurance, education, healthcare. There are very few that we wouldn't do. I don't think we would do anything in gaming or hardware or bio today. So just to be totally explicit about where our strengths or our blind spots exist today, those are just not sectors that we know or are as familiar with. And so it's very unlikely that we would invest in something like that today. With respect to the question around founder characteristics or traits, the number one thing that we would want to look for is what we touched on earlier about a founder's excitement, willingness, determination, commitment to giving back in some way to the ecosystem that they're a part of. So in the case of our conversation today, it would be a founder building in Pakistan because of a determination to help move forward the development of Pakistan's tech ecosystem. And it would be a real commitment to working on the evolution of that ecosystem over time. So quite literally backing the next generation of founders, and lobbying for continuous development of amicable for business, regulatory, legislative pieces, etc., things like that.
Okay, great. What has been your best and worst investment? I take it in Pakistan, or maybe broader. You can expand the scope for this. And what are the lessons learned from the worst one?
Well, I certainly can't delineate in any way kind of what is the best or the worst across Pakistan or any of our companies, frankly, because it it's too small of a batch, and it wouldn't be right for me to do as their investor. But what I can say is that I have found that the best entrepreneurs are ones that are prepared for moments of uncertainty, moments of change, that are prepared for the possibility of taking a pivot at some point, that are prepared for the possibility of raising a down round if that's what the business needs, and that are just more comfortable with that uncertainty of starting a business and of all that comes along with it. I think people that are able to exist with that knowledge and not also have their entire personality and their entire sense of who they are be tied to the success of their company, I actually think makes the best founders. Because if you are someone for whom your business it has become your entire identity, any volatility or fluctuations to that business impact you so greatly that sometimes you aren't able, I think, to make the most clear-headed decisions for your business. But people that are acknowledging of the fact that this business will evolve like this and I won't ever fully be prepared for that or know how to predict it, but that I'm accepting that that is coming and I'm willing to roll with the punches, and I'm excited, frankly, to do everything that I can to navigate my business, my team, my stakeholders through that process, I think sets people up for success the most. It really is a 10-year journey.
Very true.
And
Yeah.
I think for myself, honestly, it's something that I even learned as a founder that in truth, I don't think I fully understood before I started, was any business that you are building for 10 to 15 years. And that it's a marriage. It's an incredible commitment that you are making, and it is entirely consuming in a lot of ways. And if you are so deeply in love with an idea and are passionate that there is an opportunity here, that you are willing to accept that uncertainty, that you are willing to accept the challenges that inevitably will come, then pursue it wholeheartedly. But know that that is also a piece of it. And if that feels like way too much to ask for, then potentially either the idea isn't the one that you want to marry yourself to for the next decade, or it's not the right moment in your life, or anything else. But I think those actually internal inner questions that people should ask of themselves, they have a tremendous effect on how the business is able to grow long term.
Great, fantastic, great advice also. What's your view in Pakistan, and how do you de-risk against the currency devaluation risk? That's a favorite question of LPs also. And let me add to that, Yana, probably the last investment you made around about that time, Pakistan dollar bond was probably yielding around 35%. Add to that around 20% of annual currency devaluation. That puts a cost of capital north of 50%. How do you make an investment case, and then how do you hedge against that kind of, sort of macro instability or macros in a country?
I think the first part of my answer to your question is true for any part of the world that we invest in, which is, as early stage investors, we are looking at an exit horizon of, realistically, in today's market, 10 to 12 or 13 years. And so to spend too much of our energy thinking about what's currently going on on an economic or political level in any of the markets that we invest in, I don't think would be the best use of our time. And I think would potentially incorrectly guide our investment decision making. Because over a decade-long period, economic fluctuations, political fluctuations, it is inevitable that they will come and they will go. And that there will likely be some pretty big unexpected events in a country's life cycle along the way as well. But that doesn't mean that it should change our conviction on investing in Pakistan or investing in any other emerging market. And there's actually been quite interesting evidence, particularly around Turkey and Brazil, that Endeavor put together, and Alan Taylor from Endeavor Catalyst is also one of our partners. So I had the privilege of looking through some of those data points with him. And just for those two countries, if you look over that 10-year time horizon, there were pretty meaningful points of economic and political volatility. But net, the trajectory of the country's tech development and of the ability of those companies to exit remained steady is the wrong word, but it remained really strong. And the exits that occurred were very, very meaningful, actually, from an economic quantitative perspective. So the first part of it is that we try not to let that impact our investment decision making too much. And the second is, and while doing that, we also have more real in the weeds conversations with potential founders about how they're going to, frankly, be able to exist in that kind of environment. So how are you going to make sure that you have enough capital in that time frame to build out your business and withstand different periods of volatility? And do you in general know how to manage cash flow well to ensure that you're okay through those time periods? And as valuations have evolved in all other parts of the world, so too does that play a role into the kinds of conversations that we have with companies that we might invest into.
Okay, great. So no sort of structured protection like hedging,
No,
currency hedging, or anything like that, right?
no.
Okay. And I suppose diversification across a lot of markets helps.
Yes.
Also, and coming in early, you also have very high expectations of returns also that take care of some of that risks. What was your first investment in Pakistan? I think you've already talked about that. That was
Bazaar,
Bazaar.
for anybody that missed it.
Yeah. What is your take on EdTech? I guess you like that because you invested in Maqsad. How does Alter work with the founders besides the funding? I think you've touched about that also. That's what you do. You explain how you work with founders on earlier on.
In addition to that, by the way, one thing that we haven't spoken about, but I think is a very interesting and unique value add that Alter has is what's called the Alter Fellowship Program. So this program actually started back when we were still a nonprofit, because we recognized that in addition to access to capital, access to high quality talent was really something that was missing for founders in emerging markets. And so we started to connect early stage professionals, so typically people with 2 to 6 or so years of experience who were working either as consultants at some of the bigger firms or as engineers at large tech companies. They were going through finance rotationals or similar things like that. We would connect them with one of our portfolio companies, and they would go join them and work on the ground with them for 6 to 12 months. So to date, we've had 99, or I'm waiting for this to switch over next month, actually. But we've had 99 fellows go through the program, 14 of which transitioned full time within the companies that they joined. And actually, of that 99, I think 91 or 92 had never previously been to the country that they ultimately worked in or spoke the language. And so we've sent fellows to Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Egypt, Indonesia, India, Nigeria.
Not Pakistan yet?
No Pakistan yet, but that's because of our own portfolio companies. They've had opportunities.
All right. So,
So it's always on
there's
the
actually a
table.
related question that says, if I am based in Pakistan, can I be part of the fellowship program?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. The answer is yes.
Yes, all of the
Um,
information for the fellowship program is on our website. And I'll
okay.
just make it really easy. If you go to alter.vc or alter.global, they redirect to the same place. In the top right-hand side is our menu. Then there's careers. You click on careers and you'll see Alter Fellowship Program. You can click into it and reach out anytime.
Great. Thank you. What do you think of valuations? Maybe it's a very open-ended question to answer, frankly, but maybe you can compare valuations of startups across the markets that you invest in. Where is it more expensive? Where can you find better deals?
Mm-hmm. Sure. The more
I suppose
expensive,
India is very expensive.
yes, India is very expensive. Brazil is very expensive.
Okay.
Other surrounding countries in the regions that they are a part of, so the rest of Latin America, the rest of South Asia, a bit more reasonable. For
Okay.
example, like Pakistani valuations are much more net reasonable than Indian valuations. The same is true, for example, in Colombia versus Brazil. So it makes sense, right? If we're thinking about the most developed tech ecosystems and the presence and prevalence of capital that they have flowing in those markets right now, and investors actively looking to put money in. But I think the evolution as a whole of valuations is the right one, right? The kinds of adjustments that we have all been making over the last couple of years are the right ones. And I think the ways in which they're going to continue developing is also good. So I think now is the most excited I've been in a long time from a new investment standpoint, because expectations from founders and their investors have evolved, as have uh, just the awareness of kind of what reasonable numbers should look like going forward.
Great. How do you measure and evaluate the value of it? I think you need a 1 hour session to answer that question, so I'm going to skip over that. Uh, what's your fund size and what stage of the life cycle are you at?
Yes, so we have an interesting structure. We're actually a rolling fund. So it's
Wow.
a relatively novel financial product that Angel has created a couple of years ago, but effectively you as an organization are able to fund, raise, and deploy capital at the same time, rather than having to do a more traditional fixed close and then deployment period. So we have about a year or so left in this fund, and this is about a $30 million fund.
Okay. So does that mean you'll need to exit in a year as well?
No. Exit time horizon is still the same. So
Okay.
in our materials, it's 7 to 10 years. And I think as our conversations with other funds and just the market dynamics have evolved over the coming years, we're aware that that might also be a bit more as well.
Okay. What's your take on health tech sector and emerging markets? I guess you said you invest in them.
We have not made any active investments in the healthcare space yet, but we would really like to. So we're quite open to it.
Okay. I can connect you with one of my portfolio companies. It's
Oh,
a great
excellent,
company.
please.
Do you help startups scale across borders?
Yes. Yes.
You do. Okay.
Yes. A number of our companies have scaled beyond the markets that they started in. For example, Zambil out of Pakistan is now operating pretty heavily in the UAE and Saudi. Another of our portfolio companies, Club in India, is also operating across the UAE and Saudi. Some of our African companies are in the same position, and certainly our Latin American businesses, almost from the get-go, operate across the region. So very much something that we're familiar with. I will say I don't necessarily think that operationally working with our founders to expand into new markets is always our area of the biggest expertise, but we will always be open about what we can and can't do with a given founder. And if we are not the best person to help them with something, then we'll find them the person who is.
Okay, fantastic. In the current economic climate, what investment strategies do you recommend for Pakistani startups seeking to raise capital? I guess the underlying message being, given the macro instability, political instability, companies are looking to raise capital. There's very little local capital that's available. What's your best advice to startup founders?
In general, even macro aside for a second, try to be as clear, concise about the business that you are wanting to build and the problem that you're solving as humanly possible. Anything that you want to convey should be able to be conveyed within 3 sentences max, at least just to get people's initial attention. Because oftentimes I will say founders will reach out with really long explanations of what they want to build, and things kind of take a circuitous route. And just the truth is that investors have so many pitches that come to them at any given time that it's really in your best interest as a founder to be as concise as possible with what you're doing, and just brevity is your friend, right? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That certainly rings true for us as well. One step deeper into that of how founders can also stand out, the biggest thing that all investors are also wondering about once they understand what you want to build is, what is the economics of this going to look like over time, right? You don't necessarily have to have your CAC figured out at that point, but in general, is there a willingness to pay in the market for a product that you're going to build? Have you gotten some inclination that there are customers willing to do it? How much are they willing to pay? I think founders considering the economics of a fund are actually really well positioned to pitch well. And what I mean by that is, it's really important for all founders to always keep in mind, how does a fund work, right? Funds work on a really slim exit profile. You have to have the business that exits at 50x, 100x your value in order to do well as a fund. And so that means that the investments that we're making into companies, we're always looking at them through the route of, could this return our own capital back? And so that also informs, right, the kinds of businesses that we're going to invest in and their monetization strategies. And so as a founder, it is in your best interest, if you want to raise capital from VCs, to make sure that this model that you're intending to pursue could return that capital back, right? And is not dependent on continuously raising more money to exist. Because if that's the case, you're not actually necessarily building a successful business in and of itself, right? You want to make sure.
And nothing is more true in a market like Pakistan. That is cash trap, where that foreign capital is very elusive. Fun question, Yana. Do you miss being a founder?
Yes and no. Would I build something again in the future if I was really passionate about something, couldn't get out of my head, and was like, let's do this for the next decade? Yes. But I really feel like this is where I'm meant to be, and I truly hope and intend for this to be the next decade of my life. So I think it's an incredible privilege and a gift to be able to help other founders through their own journeys as they build out their companies. I think having the humility to recognize the incredible difficulty and greater difficulty that is being a founder versus being an investor is something that has become so evident to me over the last handful of years. And yes, to continue working with founders and supporting them is all I could ask for.
Yeah, fantastic. On that note, I think we're right on the dot, 9 o'clock. I want to thank you, Yana, for your time. Really appreciate it. It was a very insightful discussion. I'm sure everybody at Park Launch, from entrepreneurs to investors looking to invest in Pakistan, And a lot of the ecosystem builders in the country, they learned a lot from this discussion. Ali, thank you very much for creating Park Launch and this platform. Everybody can learn. It has truly evolved to be one of the most prolific in terms of the richness of network, as well as usefulness of the content that it generates. So I'm sorry I couldn't get through all the questions. We are over time already, but you know how to reach out to Yash. Please go ahead and do that. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer any questions for you. Any parting words, Yana, before we say goodbye?
No, I echo everything that you've shared, and thank you everybody for joining and giving me a chance to share a little bit more about who we are and what we want to do as well. I'm very grateful to continue building relationships with, understanding of, and just a long-term commitment to the Pakistani ecosystem.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Yana. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.